There is a moment, a single, suspended half-second at 39,000 feet over the South China Sea when the most expensive silence in the history of private aviation fills a Gulfstream cabin, and it begins not with a gunshot, not with an engine failure, not with any of the catastrophes that aviation was designed to fear, but with the sharp, clean sound of a woman's open palm meeting the face of a man worth $2.4 billion. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is this. I am 5'4". I weigh 115 pounds. I have a degree from the University of the Philippines. I have 9 years of service in commercial and private aviation without a single blemish on my record. I have served heads of state, Fortune 500 executives, a Saudi prince whose security detail frisked me before every meal service, and a Russian oligarch who never once looked me in the eye during 14 hours of flight time. I have smiled through insults. I have said yes, sir, to men who did not know my name and did not care to learn it. I have poured whiskey at 2 in the morning for passengers who could not pour their own water at 2 in the afternoon. I have done all of this because it was my profession, and my profession was my promise. The promise my father made when he boarded a cargo vessel in Manila Bay and did not come home for 11 months, and then did it again and again for 22 years, so that his children could work with dignity instead of desperation. I never broke that promise. Not once. Not in 9 years, until a man grabbed my wrist at 39,000 feet like it came with the charter. My name is Celestina Reyes Magbanua. People call me Tina. And this is the story of how I lost everything in 10 minutes, and how I got something back that no billionaire, no lawyer, no phone call, and no aviation database can take from me again. To understand what happened on that aircraft, you need to understand where I come from. Because what I did at 39,000 feet didn't start at 39,000 feet, it started on the ground. In Jaro, Iloilo City. In the Visayas, the district with the centuries-old cathedral, and the university belt, and the particular strain of Filipino middle-class striving that produces nurses and engineers and seamen and flight attendants in numbers that seem impossible for a neighborhood that size. My father, Armando Magbanua, was a merchant marine officer, a chief engineer on container vessels. If you don't know what that means, let me translate it into something you'll feel. My father spent 22 years inside the engine rooms of ships owned by men who never learned his name, maintaining machinery that powered commerce he would never profit from, in temperatures that would make most office workers faint, so that every month, without fail, money would arrive in a BDO bank account in Iloilo that my mother managed with the precision of a surgeon. He missed birthdays. He missed Christmases. He missed first communions and graduations. And the afternoon, my brother, Armand Jr., broke his arm, falling off the neighbor's mango tree, and screamed for his papa. And papa was somewhere in the Indian Ocean keeping a diesel engine alive for men who would never hear that scream. He missed everything that a father is supposed to be present for, and he did it deliberately, systematically, month after month, year after year, because he had made a calculation that millions of Filipino parents make and that no one outside the Philippines fully understands. That absence is an investment. And the return on that investment is the guarantee that your children will never have to make the same choice. My mother, Elvie Reyes, was a public school teacher. She taught at a local school in Jaro and supplemented the family income by tutoring college students in English and selling homemade empanadas at the university gate. She continued selling those empanadas even after my father's remittances made it technically unnecessary, because my mother believed something she told me once that I've never forgotten. A woman who depends entirely on money she doesn't earn is a woman who has already been purchased. That sentence lived in the walls of our house. It lived in the way she stood at that gate, in the heat, wrapping empanadas in brown paper, making change, smiling at students who were half her age and twice her height. It lived in the way she looked at my father's bank transfers, grateful but never dependent. The money was welcome, The self-sufficiency was sacred. There were three of us. Armand Jr., the eldest, followed my father into the merchant marine, a chief engineer like his papa, continuing the family tradition of making engines run for people who don't know your name. Patricia, the youngest, became a registered nurse and moved to Melbourne, where she works 12-hour shifts in a hospital and sends money home and calls every Sunday and cries sometimes when she talks to Mama because Melbourne is beautiful, but it is not Jaro. And then there was me, Celestina, the middle child, the one who wanted to fly. We were raised under a single, non-negotiable mandate that my father repeated every time he came home between contracts, sitting on the porch in Jaro with his coffee and his exhaustion and his hands that smelled like diesel no matter how many times he washed them. Education is the only currency that doesn't depreciate. We heard it so many times it became rhythmic, almost musical, a family anthem sung in the key of sacrifice. And we listened. All three of us listened. Armand graduated with his marine engineering degree. Patricia passed her nursing boards on the first attempt. And I graduated cum laude from the University of the Philippines, Visayas, with a degree in tourism management and a conviction that I would spend my career in the sky, serving people, doing it well, doing it with the pride that my father had earned in 22 years of engine rooms. I trained at the Philippine Airlines Flight Attendant Academy. I flew commercial for 3 years, domestic and regional routes, Manila to Cebu, Manila to Hong Kong, the bread and butter circuits where you learn to manage turbulence, both atmospheric and human. Then, Sky Pacific Executive Aviation recruited me for their VVIP division. VVIP, very, very important passengers. The kind of passengers who charter Gulfstreams and Bombardier Globals and expect the service level to match the aircraft cost, which on a G650ER is approximately $12,000 per flight hour. Sky Pacific was based in Manila and operated a fleet of 12 aircraft serving ultra-high net worth individuals, corporations, and governments across Asia Pacific. The company employed 47 cabin crew members, all Filipino, all trained to international VVIP service standards that would make a 5-star hotel concierge look like a gas station attendant. The standards were exacting. The uniform was precise. A tailored navy blazer, a cream silk blouse, a pencil skirt, low heels designed for stability in turbulence. The hair was regulation pulled back in a bun, not a strand out of place. The smile was regulation too, though they never put that in the manual. You learned the smile the way you learned the safety briefing, through repetition until it became automatic, until the muscles in your face could produce warmth and composure regardless of what was happening behind your eyes. I loved the work. I want to be honest about that, because what comes later might make it seem like I didn't, like I was a victim waiting to happen. I wasn't. I loved the precision of the service, the choreography of a perfect cabin setup, the satisfaction of anticipating a passenger's needs before they spoke them. I loved being good at something that required skill and composure, and a kind of emotional intelligence that most people don't even recognize as intelligence. I earned 128,000 pesos a month, the highest salary in my family's history, higher than my father ever made in 22 years at sea. That number meant something. It meant the calculation had worked. The absence had paid off. The empanadas had compounded. But the work had a cost, and the cost was this. In 6 years of VVIP service, I learned that extreme wealth does something to the human perception of other people. Not always. Not everyone. I served clients who were gracious, who learned my name, who tipped generously, and treated me like a professional. But there was a category, not a majority, but a persistent and unmistakable category of passengers for whom the $12,000 flight hour didn't just purchase transportation and service. It purchased me. Not my labor, not my skill, me. My compliance, my silence, my body's proximity to their body, without the right to object to anything that proximity produced. They didn't think of it this way. They would have been offended if you described it this way. But the behavior was consistent. They touched without asking. They spoke without courtesy. They complained without proportion. And they operated under the fundamental assumption that the price of the charter included the personhood of the crew. I had been grabbed before. An arm touch that lingered too long. A hand on the small of my back during a meal service. A passenger who called me sweetheart 14 times on a 5-hour flight and then complained to my supervisor that I seemed cold. I had absorbed all of it. I had pressed my fingernails into my palms, a technique I developed in my first year at PAL for managing the physical effects of suppressed anger, channeling the adrenaline into a small, controlled pain that I chose so that the larger, uncontrolled pain of the situation wouldn't choose me, and I had returned to the galley and exhaled and continued the service. Because that was the job. And the job was the promise. And the promise was everything. Then came the charter that changed my life. The passenger profile arrived on my tablet 3 days before the flight, the way it always did a pre-flight brief from Sky Pacific's client management team. I'd read hundreds of these. They were clinical documents, detailing preferences, dietary requirements, behavioral notes, but some profiles carried an energy that you could feel through the screen, a vibration of institutional caution that told you this passenger was different. This profile vibrated. Thornberry, Harlan C. Age 58. Nationality: American. Hometown: River Oaks, Houston, Texas. Founder, chairman, and controlling shareholder of Thornberry Mineral Holdings, a privately held petroleum exploration and mineral extraction conglomerate. Forbes estimated his net worth at $2.4 billion. The profile noted that Harlan estimated it higher. It also noted, preferences, Macallan 18. Neat, no ice. Behavioral notes demanding, impatient, prone to verbal aggression when drinking. Client history: 14 previous Sky Pacific charters, 3 formal crew complaints, all resolved via corporate apology. No crew disciplinary action. Service posture: maximum deference, minimum eye contact during service. Do not initiate conversation. I read the behavioral notes twice. 3 formal crew complaints, all resolved via corporate apology. That meant 3 separate cabin crew members had filed complaints about this man's behavior, and each time the company had apologized not to the crew member but to the client and moved on. The crew members had been the ones to absorb the cost. The client had been the one to receive the apology. This was the math of VVIP aviation, expressed in its purest form. The client's displeasure is a liability. The crew member's distress is an operating expense. The route was Davao City to Hong Kong. With a scheduled fuel stop in Clark, Pampanga, Harlan had spent 4 days in Mindanao, inspecting Thornberry Minerals' offshore exploration operations in the Sulu Sea. The trip had been contentious: local opposition to drilling, a permit delay from the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, an environmental impact assessment that, according to the operational notes, Harlan considered performative obstruction. He was frustrated. He was tired. And by the time he boarded the Gulfstream G650ER at 8:45 in the evening, he was, as the ground crew at Francisco Bangoy International Airport could see from the tarmac, several whiskeys, into a mood that everyone who serves powerful men learns to read the way a sailor reads the sky. He did not greet the crew when he boarded. He dropped into his seat, the forward-facing single, the one that costs the charter client $12,000 per flight hour, and said without looking up, "Whiskey, double." Now, I had the drink ready in 45 seconds. Macallan 18, neat, no ice, exactly as the profile specified. I placed it on the leather inlaid side table. He took it without acknowledgement. I returned to the galley. Janeth Basco, my junior crew member, 26 years old, capable and calm, looked at me from the galley doorway. I shook my head slightly. The universal cabin crew signaled for, "It's going to be a long flight." There were 2 other passengers aboard. Mitchell Rayner Mitch was Thornberry Minerals' VP of Asia Pacific Operations, Harlan's operational lieutenant in the Philippines. American. Tall. Lean. With the permanently tightened jaw of a man who has spent 7 years learning to absorb his employer's moods. the way a seismograph absorbs tremors with professional detachment and personal dread. The other was Addie Dominguez, Thornberry Minerals Philippine legal counsel, a corporate lawyer from a Makati firm who had been invited aboard for a working dinner that would never materialize because Harlan's mood had rendered all work impossible. Captain Dante Villanueva, 45 years, old, 22 years of combined commercial and private aviation experience. One of the steadiest pilots I'd ever worked with announced a flight time of approximately 3 hours 40 minutes to Hong Kong, with smooth air expected until a weather system north of Luzon that might produce moderate turbulence. Harlan didn't listen. He was on his phone, berating someone about the DENR permit. His voice filled the cabin the way his voice always filled any space it entered, at a single volume designed for boardrooms and hangars and tarmacs, a volume that did not decrease when the space did. On a private jet at 39,000 feet, Harlan Thornberry's voice was not a sound. It was an environment. I served dinner a pre-ordered Japanese Wagyu set prepared by a Davao caterer to Sky Pacific specifications. He ate 3 bites, pushed the plate away, and said, "This tastes like airport food." I removed the plate without comment. I offered an alternative, a charcuterie selection and fruit. He took the charcuterie. He did not say thank you. I had not expected him to. Thank you is a word that acknowledges a transaction between equals. In Harlan's economy, there were no equals, only functions, and the man the functions served. Over the next 75 minutes, he consumed 4 additional whiskeys. That brought his total for the evening to approximately 7 double Macallan 18s. His behavior deteriorated along a gradient I had seen before, many times, in many cabins. Loud became louder. Impatient became hostile. The phone calls ended. The attention turned inward toward the cabin, toward the staff, toward the people who could not leave. He started with Mitch. "Your people let a bunch of fishermen and a government clerk delay a $200 million exploration program. That's your job. You failed at your job." Mitch absorbed this the way Mitch absorbed everything by nodding and saying, "Yes, sir." While his jaw did its familiar tightening, he moved to Addie. "Dominguez, I pay your firm $400,000 a year. I can't drill a hole in the ocean because you can't file a permit correctly. Explain that to me in words I can bill for." "Addie?" Dominguez offered a measured legal explanation. Harlan cut him off. "I didn't ask for a lecture. I asked for a permit." And then he turned to the cabin crew. To me. He pressed the call button. I responded within 8 seconds. The Sky Pacific standard is 10. I was always under it. He wanted another whiskey. I prepared it. As I leaned to place the glass on the side table, my hand brushed his arm. The contact was so minor that in any other context in a restaurant, on a commercial flight, in any normal human interaction, it would not have been perceptible. Harlan perceived it. "Watch it," he said. "My apologies, sir." "You people can't even pour a drink without bumping into someone." "You people." 2 words. 2 words that landed in that cabin, the way a dropped glass lands in a quiet room, with a sharpness that makes everyone freeze and look for the damage. Mitch looked at the floor. "Addie." Dominguez examined his phone with sudden, desperate interest. Janeth, standing in the galley doorway, stopped breathing. "You people is not a racial slur. I want to be precise about that. It is something worse in certain ways. It is a categorical demotion. It reduces you from a professional to a type, from a woman to a function, from a person to a population. It is the verbal equivalent of picking up a glass and finding a crack in it and setting it down and saying, 'These glasses, not this glass, these glasses.' The plural is the weapon. The plural erases the individual and replaces her with a category that can be dismissed in bulk. I had been dismissed in bulk before, but at 39,000 feet, in a closed cabin, with nowhere to go and 7 hours of whiskey sitting across from me, the plural hit differently. "I apologize, Mr. Thornberry." "It won't happen again." It shouldn't have happened once. This is a $65 million aircraft, and I can't get a drink served by someone with basic motor skills. I absorbed this. I returned to the galley. I pressed my fingernails into my palms. I breathed. I did everything the training had taught me, and everything my 9 years of experience had reinforced. Absorb, contain, continue. Absorb, contain, continue. The mantra of every woman who works in a service profession and who has learned that her anger, no matter how justified, is a luxury she cannot afford because the system that employs her has classified her anger as a defect rather than a response. Then, 16 minutes later, he pressed the call button again. I responded. His glass was half empty. I took it to the galley. I poured a fresh Macallan. I returned to his seat. As I leaned to place the glass on the side table, the aircraft hit a pocket of light turbulence. Nothing significant. A momentary jolt that registered as a 1 on a 10-point scale. The whiskey didn't spill. The glass didn't tip. But my balance shifted, and for approximately 1/2 of 1 second, my shoulder made contact with Harlan Thornberry's chest. What happened next happened fast, but I remember it in slow motion. The way you remember any moment that divides your life into before and after. He grabbed my wrist, not gently, not incidentally, not the way you might catch someone's arm to steady them during turbulence. He grabbed it the way a man grabs something he considers his to control, with the full authority of a hand that has never been told it cannot touch what it reaches for. His fingers closed around my wrist and squeezed, and I could feel the pressure mapping itself onto my skin in what I knew, even in that fraction of a second, would become bruises. 4 finger-shaped marks that I would photograph at 6 in the morning in a Hong Kong hotel bathroom and save to a folder on my phone labeled Evidence. I said, "Watch it." His face was close to mine. His breath was Macallan and anger, and the specific chemical byproduct of a man who has spent 58 years believing that his will is the organizing principle of any room he enters. His grip was tight. His eyes were not drunk. They were certain. This was not a man losing control. This was a man exercising control. The distinction is important. Drunk men grab because their coordination has failed. Harlan grabbed because his sense of ownership had succeeded. He grabbed because, at some fundamental level of his psychology, the $12,000 flight hour had purchased my wrist, along with the whiskey and the leather seats and the silence of the crew. I looked at his hand on my wrist. I looked at his face, and in the approximately 3 seconds that followed, 3 seconds that contained more calculation than most people perform in a day, I computed the full cost of what my body was already deciding to do. My job, 128,000 pesos per month, the highest salary in my family's history. My career, 9 years of service without a single mark. My father's 22 years at sea. My mother's empanadas at the university gate. My brother Armand's engine room. My sister Patricia's hospital, shifts in Melbourne. The family WhatsApp group where every Sunday my father types, "Proud of my 3, with an emoji he doesn't know how to resize. The mandate, the promise, the non-negotiable foundation of everything our family had built. That our service would be professional, not survival, and that the difference between the two is dignity. I calculated all of this, and then I understood something that no training manual and no behavioral briefing and no amount of professional composure can prepare you for. Dignity is not a calculation. Dignity is a reflex. And the reflex, the one that lives beneath the uniform and beneath the smile and beneath the 9 years of "yes, sir," and the fingernails and the palms and the breathing exercises in the galley, the reflex said, with a clarity that was louder than any voice I had ever used, "This hand does not belong on my body." I slapped him across the face. The sound was sharp and clean and completely out of place in a Gulfstream cabin at 39,000 feet. And it hung in the air the way a gunshot hangs in a cathedral, wrong in every acoustic sense, impossible to absorb, impossible to undo. Mitch's mouth fell open. Addie. Dominguez's phone slid from his hand. Janeth, in the galley doorway, made a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a prayer. Harlan released my wrist. He touched his cheek. He looked at his own hand as if expecting to see blood. There was none. There was only the thermal memory of my palm and the expression on the face of a man who had not been physically contradicted in decades, an expression that cycled through shock, then humiliation, then rage, before settling on the one he knew best, authority. I stepped back. My hand was shaking. My face was not. I said, in a voice that was steady and clear, and that carried 22 years of my father's engine rooms and 30 years of my mother's empanada stand, and every time I had ever pressed my fingernails into my palms instead of using them, "You do not touch me, sir." The "sir" was the cruelest word in the sentence. I knew it as I said it. It was the leash going back on after the bite. It was the uniform reassembling itself around the woman who had just shattered it. It was the acknowledgement that even in the act of reclaiming my body, I could not fully escape the economic architecture that required me to be polite to the man who had just seized it. He stared at me. The cabin was a vacuum. No one breathed. No one moved. The engines hummed their indifferent hum. Then he said, very quietly, and the quiet was more frightening than any volume I had ever heard from him, because Harlan Thornberry's quiet was not calm. It was AIM. You're done. What Harlan Thornberry did in the next 10 minutes is the part of this story that I need you to understand completely, because it is not the part that makes people angry. The grab makes people angry. The slap makes people cheer. It is the part that should make you afraid, because the grab was a moment. The slap was a moment, but the 10 minutes that followed were a system. And systems are more dangerous than moments because systems do not require anger to function. They require only access. And access, at $2.4 billion, is unlimited. He took out his phone. He called the CEO of Sky Pacific Executive Aviation, my employer, the company that had employed me for 6 years. The company whose revenue from Harlan's charter contracts represented approximately 18% of their annual business. The phone rang once. Vaughn. One of your people just assaulted me on my aircraft. Celestina Magbanua. Senior crew. She struck me in the face. I want her terminated before this aircraft lands. I stood in the galley and listened. I couldn't not listen. The cabin of a Gulfstream is not large, and Harlan was not modulating his voice. He told the CEO a version of events. The attendant was clumsy. He corrected her. She became aggressive. She struck him unprovoked. He did not mention the wrist grab. He did not mention the turbulence. He did not mention the 7 whiskeys. He did not mention you people. He told the version that $2.4 billion tells the version where the world malfunctioned around him, and he was the only still point. The CEO, Vaughn Kirby, said he would investigate. Harlan said, there was nothing to investigate. Vaughn said, company policy required a formal process. And then Harlan said something that I heard clearly, every word, standing 8 feet away in the galley of an aircraft that suddenly felt like a coffin. Vaughn, your company flies my jet, services my contracts, and depends on my business for roughly 1/5 of your operation. This isn't a policy question. It's a math question. She's off my crew, she's out of your company, and if her name appears on any flight manifest in the Asia-Pacific region within the next calendar year, I will move my charter contract to Metrojet and make sure every VVIP client in your portfolio knows why. That was minute 1. By minute 3, he had called an aviation law firm in Hong Kong Hathaway Stern Chambers and instructed them to file formal complaints against me with the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines and the Hong Kong Civil Aviation Department. Physical assault by a flight attendant in the performance of duty. He wanted my name in every aviation database in the region. The lawyer asked if there were witnesses. Harlan said, Mitch saw everything. And he looked at Mitch Mitchell Rayner, VP of Asia, Pacific Operations, 7 years of employment, a mortgage, and children's school fees, and an entire professional identity that existed within the radius of Harlan's approval, and Mitch nodded. Mitch, who had watched a man grab a woman's wrist before she slapped him, looked at his employer, and nodded. The nod was the smallest gesture in the entire evening. It will take the longest to metabolize. A nod is nothing. A nod is everything. A nod is the distance between the truth and the version of the truth that pays your mortgage. By minute 5, he had called his head of corporate communications in Houston and instructed her to prepare a preemptive media statement. Unprovoked assault, pattern of misconduct, whatever it takes. He was building a narrative, not a lie exactly, but an edit. A careful removal of every detail that complicated the simple story he wanted told. Employee attacks client. Client is the victim. Employee is the problem. By minute 7, he had called Thornberry Minerals' VP of Government Relations in Manila, who maintained relationships with Philippine regulatory bodies, and instructed him to ensure that my aviation credentials were reviewed. A word that everyone in that chain of communication understood was not a request for review, but a request for suspension. Flag the certification for audit. Trigger the mandatory grounding. Bury the woman in process until the process itself becomes the punishment. By minute 9, he sent a text message to a group chat of the Asia-Pacific VVIP Aviation Association, an informal network of 43 charter company executives, private jet owners, and aviation service providers. The message identified me by name, by company, and described the slap only the slap, never the grab, and recommended that my name be flagged on any crew manifest in the region. Within the hour, the message had been read by every person in the chat. By morning, it would be screenshotted and forwarded to every charter operation from Hong Kong to Kuala Lumpur. By minute 10, he put down his phone. He picked up his whiskey. He drank. And he looked at me standing in the galley where I had stood for the entire annihilation, listening to every call, understanding the architecture of my professional destruction with the same clarity I used to understand the architecture of the aircraft, and he said, "You should have just poured the drink." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. In 10 minutes, using nothing but a phone, Harlan Thornberry had activated a network that spanned 3 countries, 2 regulatory bodies, 1 law firm, 1 PR department, 1 industry association, and the entire employment infrastructure of Philippine private aviation. He had not shouted. He had not threatened physical violence. He had made phone calls, and each phone call was a brick in a wall being built around my career, my income, my family's stability, and the 22 years of my father's absence that were supposed to guarantee that this exact thing could never happen. The aircraft landed in Hong Kong at 1:27 in the morning. I disembarked in silence. Janeth held my hand on the jet bridge, a gesture so small and so necessary that I can still feel her fingers if I close my eyes. Captain Villanueva stopped me as I passed the flight deck. He said quietly, "I heard what he did. I'll write a report." I nodded. I walked into the Hong Kong night. My wrist was bruised. My career was over. My dignity was intact. I did not yet know that only one of those things could be repaired. At 7 in the morning, Vaughn Kirby called my hotel room. He told me I was suspended pending investigation. I asked if the investigation would include the wrist grab. He said, "The client's account does not mention physical contact on his part." I said, "He grabbed my wrist. Hard enough to bruise. I have photographs." There was a silence on the line that contained the entire economics of my industry. Then Vaughn said, "Tina, this is a $2.4 billion client. Please understand what I'm telling you." I understood. I had always understood. The understanding was not new. The understanding was the wallpaper of my professional life. You are the service. The service does not have a version. The service has a function, and when the function conflicts with the client's narrative, the function is discontinued. Within a week, I was formally terminated. The stated reason: gross misconduct, physical assault on a charter client during active service. The termination letter did not mention the wrist grab. It did not mention the turbulence. It did not mention the 7 whiskeys. It mentioned the slap. Only the slap. Because the slap was the only event that existed in the official record. And the official record was written by the people who paid for the record. The Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines opened an investigation into my certification. My license was suspended pending review. The Hong Kong Civil Aviation Department flagged my name in the regional database. Harlan's text to the VVIP Aviation Association circulated through every corner of the industry. Within 5 days, I was informally blacklisted across every major private charter operator in the region: Hong Kong, Singapore, Manila, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur. No formal blacklist existed. None was needed. A billionaire's advisory in an industry built on discretion and client relationships is not a recommendation. It is an instruction. I went home, to Jero, to the house my father's sea years built. I told my parents there had been a disagreement with a client and that I was taking a break while the company investigated. My father, Armando, looked at me across the kitchen table with the eyes of a man who had spent 22 years maintaining engines on vessels owned by men who never learned his name, and he saw something in my face that he recognized immediately: the specific wound of a professional who had given everything to a system that gave nothing back. He didn't press for details. He made me coffee. He sat with me on the porch. He said, "The sea was hard, Anak, but I always came home. I cried for the first time since the aircraft. My mother was less patient. Elvie Reyes did not become a woman who sold empanadas in the rain by accepting silence as an answer. She asked questions. She read my face. She found the photograph of the bruised wrist on my phone. And she said, with the quiet authority of 30 years of standing at that university gate and never once being ashamed of the work, 'You file a case.' I retained a lawyer named Addy, Isagani Villafuerte. Everyone called him Gani, a labor and human rights attorney based in Quezon City, who had spent 2 decades representing Filipino overseas workers and domestic workers and service industry employees in cases against employers who could afford lawyers that charged more per hour than Gani charged per case. His office was above a print shop in Cubao. His conference table was a repurposed dining table. His walls were lined with case files. He was what the Philippine legal profession calls a cause lawyer, a man who takes cases because they are right, not because they are profitable. Addy. Villafuerte reviewed my documentation, the bruise photographs, the passenger profile with its behavioral notes, the termination letter, Captain Villanueva's incident report, which directly contradicted Harlan's account, and filed 4 separate actions: a complaint with the Department of Labor and Employment for illegal termination, a criminal complaint for acts of lasciviousness against Harlan Thornberry based on the unwanted physical contact, a complaint with CAP challenging the license suspension, and a civil complaint for damages against Thornberry and his Philippine subsidiary for assault, moral damages, and economic losses from the industry blacklisting. The filings were public record. A reporter at the Philippine Daily Inquirer picked up the story. The headline read, "Filipina Flight Attendant files assault case against American billionaire after being fired for defending herself." The article included the bruise photographs. It included my account. It included a statement from Addy Villafuerte that said something I have memorized because it is the most accurate sentence anyone has ever spoken about what happened to me. A man grabbed a woman's body without consent at 39,000 feet, and when she defended herself, he destroyed her career in 10 minutes using nothing but a phone. This is not a story about a slap. This is a story about who is allowed to touch whom and who decides what happens next. The article went viral. Not Philippine, viral, globally viral. CNN Philippines, ABS-CBN, Rappler, the South China Morning Post, the BBC's Asia Desk, the Houston Chronicle, American Cable News. The narrative was clean and visual and universal. A small woman, a powerful man, a slap, and the machinery of wealth deployed to crush a working-class career. And then something happened that I had not expected and that I still, even now have difficulty describing without crying. Filipino workers around the world overseas, Filipino workers, domestic helpers, nurses, seamen, construction workers, caregivers started sending money. A GoFundMe organized by the OFW community raised $312,000 in 48 hours. $20 here, $50 there. Each donation from someone who had been grabbed, in one way or another, by one hand or another, in one cabin or kitchen or construction site or hospital ward or engine room, and who had never been able to slap back. They sent what they could. They sent it with messages I will never delete. Para sa lahat ng Filipina na pinagtiyagan. For every Filipina who endured. Hindi ka nag-isa, Tina. You are not alone, Tina. I refused the money at first. Addie. Villafuerte explained that the legal battle would cost more than my family's savings. I accepted it, not as charity, as solidarity. As $312,000 worth of proof that the people who had been grabbed recognized the woman who had slapped back. The legal process moved through the Philippine system with unusual speed propelled by media, attention, public pressure, and the specific institutional urgency that Philippine bureaucracies develop when the entire country is watching. The Department of Labor ruled that Sky Pacific had illegally terminated me without due process and ordered them to pay back wages, separation pay, and moral damages. Sky Pacific did not appeal. Von Kirby issued a public apology written by his PR firm, reviewed by his lawyers, surgically emptied of any specificity that might acknowledge what had actually happened. CAP reinstated my flight attendant license. The investigation was closed with a finding that the original complaint had been filed without sufficient basis and without disclosure of material circumstances. CAP issued a formal advisory to all aviation operators in the Philippines. Crew members who act in self-defense against passenger physical assault are protected under existing safety regulations. The criminal case against Harlan stalled. His lawyers filed motions for dismissal. He did not return to the Philippines. The case remained open, but a man with $2.4 billion and a passport from a country that does not extradite for this category of offense is, for practical purposes, beyond the reach of the Philippine criminal justice system. This was not justice. This was geography. The civil case, the one that Thornberry's Philippine legal team knew would expose internal communications, the group chat message, the phone calls to Vaughn and Luis was settled. The amount is confidential. What I can tell you is this. Addie, Villafuerte negotiated a clause that restricted my silence to the settlement figure only. I could not disclose how much. I could discuss everything else. That clause was his masterpiece. He preserved my voice while accepting the money my family needed. The cause lawyer from Cubao, with his repurposed dining table and his walls of case files, had outmaneuvered the aviation law firm in Hong Kong that charged more for parking than he charged for representation. 3 of the 5 major Asian VVIP charter operators revised their crew protection policies within 6 months. Sky Pacific implemented a mandatory crew safety override protocol, allowing cabin crew to refuse service to aggressive passengers with legal protection for the crew member. The crew named it the Tina Rule, not management. The crew. It hangs in the crew lounge now. I have never seen it in person. I have seen photographs. The photographs are enough. Mitch Rayner resigned from Thornberry Mineral 4 months after the flight. He works for a renewable energy company in Singapore now. He has not spoken publicly about that night. He has not been asked to give a deposition. He lives with the nod. The nod he gave when Harlan looked at him and said, "Mitch saw everything." And Mitch confirmed a version of events that erased the wrist grab and the turbulence and the 7 whiskeys and the you people and replaced them with a simple, clean narrative of an employee attacking a client. I don't hate Mitch. I understand Mitch. Mitch had a mortgage and children and a career that existed within the radius of a billionaire's approval, and when the radius contracted to the diameter of a single gesture, Mitch chose the mortgage. Most people would. That's the terrifying part. Most people would. Janeth Basco left Sky Pacific and joined a commercial airline. She sends me a message every year on the anniversary of the flight. The message says, "I should have said something." I always reply, "You held my hand on the jet bridge. That was enough. I mean it." In a cabin where no one spoke, where the truth was restructured in real time by phone calls and nods and silence, Janeth held my hand. That hand was the only infrastructure that night that worked the way it was supposed to. Captain Villanueva submitted his incident report, the one that documented the turbulence, the wrist grab, the truth, and continued flying for Sky Pacific. He never discussed the incident with colleagues. He kept a copy of his report in a personal file. A quiet man who did a quiet thing that mattered loudly. Harlan Thornberry has not returned to the Philippines. His mining operations continue. His public profile has been managed to minimize association with the incident. He has not apologized. He has not acknowledged the wrist grab. He has, according to a source I trust, described the incident as a disgruntled employee situation that was weaponized by social media. He continues to fly private. He continues to press call buttons. He continues to receive whiskey from women whose names he does not learn. The system that protects him is the same system it was before the slap. I changed a policy. I did not change the system. The system is bigger than one slap. The system is bigger than one hashtag. The system is the architecture of a world where $12,000 per flight hour purchases the assumption that the bodies in the cabin are included in the price. And the architecture does not come down because one woman refused to be included. But one policy changed. One rule was written. One name, my name, was attached to a piece of paper that says, "You can say no. You can refuse. You can protect your body, even at 39,000 feet. Even if the person touching you is worth more money than your entire family will earn in 10 lifetimes. That piece of paper is not justice. Justice would be Harlan Thornberry in a courtroom. That piece of paper is something smaller and maybe more durable. A structural change, a protocol revision, a fix applied to a system that failed. It is not enough. It is what institutions produce when they cannot produce justice. I fly for Cebu Pacific now. Domestic routes. Manila to Cebu, Manila to Davao, Manila to Iloilo. I requested the Iloilo route. The pay is roughly 60% of what I made at Sky Pacific. The passengers are different. The aircraft is different. The entire atmosphere is different. Louder, more chaotic. Children crying. Overhead bins that don't close. Turbulence that makes the whole cabin gasp instead of just the glasses. It is a world away from the leather and the Macallan and the silence of a Gulf Stream at 39,000 feet. Last week, a grandmother in seat 14C asked me to help her open a bag of chicharron. I opened it. She said, "Thank you." She read my name off my badge and said, "Celestina, you have kind hands." I went to the galley and I cried. Not because I was sad, because a woman I had never met looked at my hands, the same hands that poured 7 whiskeys and placed charcuterie plates and pressed fingernails into palms, and finally, after 9 years of containment, said no, and she saw kindness. Not service, not function, not a category, kindness. And I thought, this is what my father sailed for. 22 Christmases at sea. 22 birthdays missed. 22 years of engine rooms and diesel and the specific loneliness of a man who loved his family so much that he left them for decades so they could have what he never had. This is what that bought. Not the Sky Pacific salary, not the Gulfstream cabin, not the tailored blazer and the regulation bun. This, a grandmother, a bag of chicharron. My name read off a badge by someone who looked at my hands and did not see what they had done, who saw what they were. My father still sits on the porch in Jaro every Sunday. He still types a message into the family WhatsApp group. Proud of my 3. The emoji is still too large. He still doesn't know how to resize it. It doesn't matter. The size is right. I still have the bruise photograph. I keep it in the same phone folder labeled Evidence. I have not deleted it. I will not delete it. It is not evidence anymore. It is a receipt. Proof that dignity, in the economy of a Gulf Stream at 39,000 feet over the South China Sea, costs exactly one slap, one career, one father's 22 years at sea, and one mother's empanadas in the rain. I paid it. I would pay it again